Hey guys, it's Sports213 here, and today we're going to be going over the top position players in fantasy football going into week 4, or in other words, after week 3. So, the top position players for week 3 of fantasy football is at quarterback. The top scoring quarterback in week 3 is Caleb Williams with 29.12 points in the Bears' dominant win against the Cowboys. But overall, the highest scoring QB in fantasy is Lamar Jackson with 82.68 points. And right behind Lamar Jackson is Josh Allen. And the third ranked QB in fantasy right now is Caleb Williams. The top running back in fantasy last week for the second straight week is Jonathan Taylor. This time, he had 32.8 fantasy points in the Colts' week 3 win against the Titans. And he is still the highest scoring running back in fantasy. Well, second straight week, he is the highest scoring running back in fantasy football. And he sits at 75.1 fantasy points. And for wide receiver, I don't think anybody expected Trey Tucker to be the highest scoring receiver in fantasy, man. 40.9 fantasy points in the Raiders' week 3 loss against the Commanders. Well, he had 3 touchdowns, but Raiders lost, blown out against the Commanders, who didn't have Jaden Daniels. Instead, they had Marcus Mariota as their QB, the Commanders. Oh, not to mention, Jonathan Taylor scored 3 touchdowns, too, last week for the Colts win against the Titans. But anyways, man, I don't think anybody expected Trey Tucker to be the highest scoring receiver in fantasy for week 3. And not to mention, he is the first player in fantasy football this year to score 40 points or more in a week. Crazy. Man, what are the odds of him becoming the first receiver to crack the 40 burger in fantasy football this year? I mean, I don't think anybody expected that. But the top scoring receiver for the second straight week is Puka. That's right, Puka Nacua with 73.5 fantasy points. And the top tight end in fantasy last week, the top tight end in fantasy last week was Mark Andrews with 27.1 fantasy points in the Ravens' Monday night loss against the Detroit Lions, because the Ravens lost that game to the Lions. That was a really great game last night for Monday. But despite the Ravens' loss, Mark Andrews delivered for anyone that had him on their fantasy team. So, with those 27.1 fantasy points. But the highest scoring tight end overall in fantasy football after 3 weeks is Jake Ferguson with 45.3 fantasy points. So looks like, for 3 straight weeks, we've had a different tight end. Well, for the first 3 weeks, a different tight end be the highest scoring for that position so far. I wonder who's going to be the first tight end to have a little streak of being the top of that position in fantasy. We'll wait and see. Anyways, the highest scoring defense in special teams in week 3 are the Vikings with 32 fantasy points. I believe one of their players, which is Isaiah Rodgers, he had like a pick 6 and a fumble recover for a touchdown. And then they intercepted Browning twice, and they had like 4 sacks on Browning. I did forget to write those, so yep. But at least I knew them in my head. Just knew it by heart. But that's okay. But next time I'll write them down if I need to. And that is good enough for the Vikings to be the highest scoring team's defense and special teams with 41 fantasy points. So, yeah, second straight week, a team's defense and special teams, big, strong performance, ends up being the highest scoring team's defense and special teams overall. And now the top kicker in fantasy football, well, from last week, is Chase McLaughlin of the Tampa Bay Bucks with 20 fantasy points in the Bucks Week 3 win against the Jets. And that was a crazy game. One of the crazy games because the Jets had a blocked field goal, return for a touchdown that they scored on. And then the Bucks got a field goal to win the game by Chase McLaughlin. I should have put game winner for McLaughlin, but that's okay. Maybe next time I'll do it for one of these kickers if they score a winning field goal or something. But the top kicker for the third straight week, for all 3 weeks of fantasy football, Spencer Schrader with 44 fantasy points. He is still the highest scoring kicker in fantasy football this season. And for all 3 weeks, he's been up on that spot for that position. Will we see a new kicker take the top spot in fantasy football these next few weeks or even next week? We'll have to wait and see. And one last thing that I have to point out is that both Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery, both of those two running backs, went off in that Monday night win for the Lions against the Ravens. Jahmyr Gibbs had 26.9 fantasy points, and David Montgomery had 29.4 fantasy points. And as you can see, I put a little silhouette of Sonic and Knuckles there because both Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery are known as Sonic and Knuckles for the Lions, that running back duo. Yep. That's why Jahmyr Gibbs, his name is in blue, because Sonic is blue. Hope it doesn't give him the blues. And David Montgomery's name is in red, because Knuckles is red. Who knows? Maybe one day I'm going to have to get some of my own magnets of Sonic Knuckles, because every time if either Jahmyr Gibbs or David Montgomery, or if I have to mention them, if both of them go off, or if either one of them is the top running backs for any specific week or overall, then maybe I would have to put either a Sonic or Knuckles magnet up there. So yeah. Oh, and also last week someone commented that it would be quick enough if I put these like on a document or who knows something, but well, maybe sometime whenever I don't have my whiteboard with me, I would have to basically put it on like a document for those for some weeks, whenever I'm like out of town or something like that. But anyways, so those are the top position players in fantasy football after week 3, going into week 4. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to join the Sports Dude Nation, and I'll see you guys later.